My name is Gianna Balanzi, and my video is about the dangers of chromium use in leather tanneries in Fez, Morocco. This video has three objectives. The first is to learn about the history of leather tanneries in Morocco. The second is to learn about how leather tanneries have polluted the Fez River and Cebu River. And the third is to learn why chromium use in the leather tanning industry is hazardous and how it affects the health of leather tannery workers and the environment. First, we'll go through the timeline of events. Then, I'll show the location of the sites this presentation focuses on, which are the city of Fez and its ancient tanneries, and the Cebu and Fez rivers. Then, I'll talk about leather as a major export and its importance, chromium pollution over time in the Fez and Cebu rivers, and lastly, I'll talk about how chromium affects the health of tannery workers. So let's begin with the history of leather tanneries in Fez, Morocco. In the 8th century, the city of Fez is founded by Idris II, the son of Idris I, who's the founder of the Idrisid dynasty in Morocco. The leather industry in Fez also begins during this time. Then, in the 11th century, Chouara Tannery, which is the world's oldest leather tannery, was built. Then, by the time we reach the 15th century, there were nearly 100 leather tanneries in Morocco, and Morocco now has a very good reputation for leather production and quality. Then, in the 16th century, workers used the leather to make books, shoes, and clothes, but workers are suffering from cancer due to chemicals used. Then, in the 19th century, there was a shift from traditional practices involving those dangerous chemicals to more modern machines that pose less of a hazard. However, three ancient tanneries still exist today: Chouara Tannery, Sidi Moussa Tannery, and Ain Azlitan Tannery, that still use ancient techniques and hazardous chemicals to produce the leather. So here's a map of Morocco, and here's the city of Fez, the site we'll be focusing on today. Fez is home to the three ancient leather tanneries that are still in operation that I mentioned in the last slide: Chouara Tannery, Sidi Moussa Tannery, and Ain Azlitan Tannery. As I mentioned previously, workers are harmed by dangerous chemicals involved in the ancient practices used at these three tanneries, but the workers aren't the only ones affected. Here's a map of the Cebu River and Oued River, also known as the Fez River. These rivers have experienced significant pollution due to textile activities and tanneries, especially at the stations near Fez. This is because about every 25 days, the dyes used to tan the leather lose their potency and need to be refreshed. So chemical-laden water from hundreds of vats is dumped into the Fez River every month. One chemical in particular, chromium, is especially dangerous. Chromium 3 hydroxide sulfate is the main chromium compound for leather tanning, and the primary danger of chromium 3 is that it can be oxidized into chromium 6 at very low pH values when oxygen is present. Chromium 6 is a suspected carcinogen and causes skin sensitization. Chromium also contaminates the city's food supply and sickens people, so not only leather tannery workers are affected by the chromium pollution in the rivers. Although the pollution of the rivers and chromium use have adverse effects on people and the environment, changing the operations of the tanneries is a difficult ask. Not only do these ancient tanneries have a rich history, but leather production is one of Morocco's main exports. Leather production makes up 11% of its exports, and Morocco is renowned for its leather because of the ancient techniques used. Therefore, changing the process to a safer alternative will have significant impacts on the economy of Morocco. So, how bad is the chromium pollution? Here's a line graph adapted from a study conducted by El-Hajami et al., which shows the evolution of concentration in chromium in the Cebu River in August and December in 2019. The researchers sampled the water from the Cebu River at 14 stations. The average concentration of chromium in August and December were 298.6 micrograms per liter and 63.9 micrograms per liter, respectively. These values indicate that the river had poor quality, defined as greater than 50 grams per liter, and more than 64% of samples from August and 28% of samples from December, making the water unsafe. But now let's widen the scope a bit. How bad is the pollution in comparison to other countries, and how bad is it compared to chromium levels in the river's pasts? Here's a table adapted from a study conducted by Hassini et al., in which they sampled and measured concentrations of different metal surface sediments including chromium from the Cebu and Fez rivers, and then compiled data of other authors that did similar experiments in other locations around the world. As you can see, the Cebu River has the highest concentration of chromium of the other locations tested. But now let's pay attention to chromium concentrations in the Fez and Cebu rivers in 2014 and compare them to the concentrations in 2016. As you can see, the concentrations have significantly increased, thus demonstrating the pollution problem is getting worse. Lastly, let's look at how chromium affects the health of the Moroccan tannery workers. Here's a bar graph adapted from a study conducted by Halali et al. In which they analyzed 500 cells per subject, of which there were 11 non-smoking male tannery workers, 5 non-smoking female tannery workers, 4 smoking male tannery workers, and 7 for a control. The researchers were looking for micronucleated cells, which is an indicator of DNA damage. The results demonstrate that tannery workers have significantly more micronucleated cells than the control group, and the researchers predict that chromium-6 exposure was the main candidate for why this occurs. This study shows the risk associated with working with chromium-6 as a tannery worker. In summary, the Cebu River and Fez River have serious pollution problems. Chromium is dangerous to tannery workers, citizens, and the environment, but ancient tanneries have rich history and economic benefits that make change difficult. I hope you enjoyed my presentation, and thanks for listening.